All right, so a few years ago, I played Dishonored, um, fell in love with it immediately, and as soon as I finished it, I had to play more. Went straight into Dishonored 2, and at that point, um, I just had to understand what made these games so special. And in that search, I went, looking for anything I could get my hands on in terms of like uh, behind the scenes or the making of. So I came across a GDC talk from one of the level designers at Arcane Studios who worked on the Dust District for Dishonored 2. His name was Steve Lee. Steve, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Steve Lee. I got into the industry about probably 18, 19 years ago, I think, something like that. I was in AAA studios, about four of them. Four of them for the first 9 or so years, 9 or 10. The biggest games, so the most well-known games I worked on were the last two, Bioshock Infinite and Dishonored 2. And then after that, I kind of went freelance to try and figure out what that could be, and did a mix of like contract work as a level designer and some occasional game design consulting and stuff. And I've worked on games including Alba, a wildlife adventure, which is a really cute, kind of wholesome mini open world game. John Wick Hex with Biffle Games, which was cool. Last indie game I shipped was Tactical Breach Wizards with Tom Francis and his team, Suspicious Developments. And I'm currently the lead level designer at Half Mermaid, working on Sam Barlow's next new crazy thing.
Is it? It's
Uh,
Project D or something like that, or
yeah,
Project C? I can't remember which one.
yeah. There's I'm on D. Yeah, that we've basically got two projects going, and yeah, I'm on D.
That's
Uh,
so cool. Yeah, I read his post when he first announced that those two projects were in development, and I got super excited to see that he was making something 3D. That I appreciate the video, the FMV type games that he's made in the past, but really interested to see what he's cooking up, what you're
yeah,
cooking up with him.
yeah. I can't wait. I can't wait for it to be ready to show and all that kind of thing. It's pretty
Yeah,
bonkers and interesting. Yeah.
yeah. And you also mentioned Alba. I remember checking that out back in the day. It's like a little bird watching type of game where you go around and take pictures of birds.
Yeah, kind
Uh,
of a mix of like wildlife photography and kind of it's the story's more about activism as well, like trying to do what you can in your little environment, community to kind of encourage people to take care of the place and kind of
mhm.
push back on some dubious kind of things happening in the town.
That's
And
cool.
yeah, just really wholesome game that I was really happy to work on because it's I suppose it's the only game I've worked on which I could hand to a parent and their kids or to my nephews and say I'm really
Mhm.
proud of this and I think this would be great for you to play. Everything else I've worked on is kind of like more uh, mostly violent and stuff, and like
Right.
it's kind of nice definitely to have something which is like, oh no, actually games can also be this, and really and it's not only a wholesome game but just really quite I just really love how it's done. It's kind of very particular and kind of special to me, and the team
Yeah.
was lovely to work with.
Yeah, it's super simple, but it's also pretty it's got some really interesting components to it.
Mm.
Bird watching is something that I don't really do it much, but I have since I worked on one of the projects that I worked on. Um, I pay attention to birds a lot more. Um, I don't know if you remember back in, I think it was 2010. It's a while ago, but it was one of the first movies that I worked on as an animator, and it was called The Big Year with Jack Black, Owen Wilson, and Steve Martin.
Mm.
It's kind of like
Nice.
a comedy, but it's like one of those sort of heartstrings. Not really a rom com, but it was directed by David Frankel from The Devil Wears Prada. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
Nice.
I ended up learning all about birds because I had to basically write. Um, there's a lot of handwritten text. It was all all my handwriting, and then at the end, the end credits scene, through the end credits crawl, there was a total of 755 bird species, and I got all these photographs from actual bird photographers, like birders, that
Mm.
I had to catalog all these different birds and put them into different groups and like keep track of. I don't know. It was crazy, but I learned a lot more about birds than I ever intended to. But
Nice.
since then, I've kind of like, when I see an interesting bird, I always take notice, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah, I'm a lot more like that since working on Alba, like
mhm,
making a game that is about that. Um, we just generally kind of there's a load of different bird species in the game, and and I had never really thought about them much, but it's like it made me every time, like you say, every time I've gone to a local park or like a wildlife thing, it's like, oh yeah, I can actually. It's just yeah, it makes me realize how much I wasn't paying attention to and how much there is to appreciate of these things.
yeah,
And we do a really nice job of we have a little book in the game that has that actually which you can flick through and kind of try and tick them off on your list and press a little button and it plays the sound of that bird and
hmm,
you know it's all accurate and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it made me. It's funny. It's kind of I find myself learning things about birds along with my nephews when I play it with them, kind of thing. It's a
yeah.
nice feeling as someone who
It's,
didn't learn enough of that, about that stuff when I was younger.
no,
Um,
it's
yeah.
really cool. I kind of just want to start talking about level design. The whole point of why I'm doing this podcast is just to understand the different roles within the industry and different roles within the game development pipeline. And I've already talked to a few environment artists, or a couple, and I just kind of want to understand a little bit more about your role. You're you're a level designer, but I know that you have some game designer inclinations as well. So, um, if you want to just jump in and tell me a little bit about what level design is first and foremost, and then like um, the role of a level designer within the pipeline, in not necessarily like in any specific game that you've worked on, but just maybe in general.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's maybe the easiest way to talk about is in relation to environment arts,
Hmm.
because it's another discipline that we kind of work very closely with a lot of the time, and sometimes it's kind of mixed up as well. And I'd say the basic way to sum up level design is to, obviously we're making, depending on how traditional a game, like something like Super Mario, for example, is very obvious what a level is and therefore what you're
Right.
designing there. But in a game like Dishonored, for example, we're working very closely with an environment artist throughout the whole thing. And in fact, Arcane was one of the first studios where where level designers always sat next to the environment artists,
Hmm.
because the level design is basically focused on the gameplay experience, the interactive experience, also thinking about narrative ideas to put into a level in a way that the player can kind of interact with and that kind of thing. And they're designing spaces that they're blocking out the level and stuff like that, but doing that in collaboration with a level architect, as they call them at Arcane.
Hmm. And the level architects at Arcane are those are the environment artists.
Uh, Kind of, but I suppose the difference there is that at Arcane they have people whose title is environment artist, and then they have
Hmm.
level architects. Environment artists are literally, as far as I remember, making the all the assets for the
Hmm.
environments, for the levels. But then the level architects are the artists working with the level designers to actually use those assets to make the environments. And so
Right.
it's kind of that the environment art job, I suppose, is basically split into two because of the amount of it to be done, I suppose, and also the importance of the art to be really tightly integrated with the level design. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's actually split into two roles at Arcane, and the level design is trying to kind of like like I say, focus on the interactive experience of it all, and which is kind of like at Arcane it was and Dishonored 2 it was probably the most complicated game I've worked on in terms of like how demanding both the level design and the art is for that game.
Hmm.
The art is obviously it's really high quality and it has a very goes really deep on like world building and just there's a very stylized, interesting kind of direction to the whole thing. And so that artists are really going deep on trying to make interesting, believable places that are new. They're not just realistic. They're like trying to create a new place.
Right.
And meanwhile, level designers are thinking about really unusually like non-linear kind of interesting interactive spaces, and you're trying to do both of these things at the same time, which is quite a lot of hence the
Yeah.
artist and the designer has to sit next to each other because they're talking every day, and
Right.
debating a lot
When
of solutions and this kind of stuff.
when I remember when I came across your talk, your GDC talk, I learned a few terms that, as someone coming from the outside, I wasn't familiar with. I never heard the term affordance before. I didn't really like think about that in terms of like guiding the player, like with visual cues and things like that. And another another one that I never heard before that I'm glad that I did was immersive sim. So I know that Dishonored is kind of uh, an exemplary game in the, I guess you could call it a subgenre or a game design philosophy of immersive sim. But can you
Mm.
talk a little bit about about how level design works in an immersive sim capacity?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Matt, I don't know how to describe what the immersive sim genre is because there's plenty of debate about it. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
to me, what the immersive sim is in relation to more typical games is one where, on the interactive side, there is more simulation and more systemic. More of the gameplay is systemic than in a
Hmm.
usual game. If we take like Call of Duty as the kind of obvious kind of contrast, you know, Call of Duty is a very scripted thing, very cool kind of scripted, controlled thing, which is designed to create a very specific but really cool experience.
Yeah.
Um, the gameplay of a level of an immersive sim is more about putting the player in a bigger place in terms of the possibility space and letting them explore it and interact with it more on their own terms and have more
Hmm.
agency in terms of how they choose to approach things and that kind of thing. And that a lot of that choice comes from simulated kind of systemic gameplay mechanics and things that can be manipulated in a more kind of freeform way. So that simulation aspect is a big part of it. I'd say the immersive side of the title comes from like um, the idea that it's not just gameplay and then you finish the gameplay and there's a story bit and then you switch back to the gameplay. It's
Hmm.
much more the idea that there's always a relationship between gameplay and story, and you're always pursuing objectives that have narrative ideas around them and characters involved, and often you have agency within the narrative to change the way the story goes a bit. And so you're
Hmm.
immersed in it in a different way to a traditional game because the gameplay and the story are more closely tied together.
Yeah.
And so as a level designer, it means that you're thinking about gameplay and story all the time, and you're pitching ideas that are both interactively interesting and narratively interesting. You hope. Um,
Yeah. And the
and so yeah,
term,
it's a much more yeah. Hence
sorry.
the title of my talk being the holistic thing, because the game
Mhm.
forces you to think in a very holistic way. You have to think about the whole picture and how everything fits together.
I
Um,
imagine that influences your interest in a more global, like game design um, centric way of thinking too. Um,
yeah, in a way, yeah. I mean, I suppose it kind of it's hard not to work on that kind of game and then yeah, have opinions on how. I mean, I suppose on any game, if you're that way inclined, you'll as a level designer, you'll think about the game design side of things and how what works, what you think works well, and what you would do if you did your own thing, that kind of thing. But
right.
but ultimately, you kind of have to. I think every level designer has to kind of be a game designer, and I think it helps for a game designer to have level design experience because ultimately level one way of looking at level design is that in terms of gameplay and mechanics and stuff is that you're trying to express the potential of the game design of
Hmm.
whatever mechanics and enemy types and gameplay stuff there is, scripting systems in the editor and stuff. You're trying to express the potential of it and not waste any of it that is appropriate to the theme of the game and stuff like this. And similarly, if you're a game designer, making a game that is made of levels that are
Yeah.
made by level designers, if you can design the components of your game in a way that helps level designers, you're going to end up with a better game. And so it's just, that's the kind of relationship between those two, really, that we're kind of working for each other in that sense.
Right.
So yeah, I think ideally all level designers should be pretty, interested in game design, because you have to be able to see the potential of what you're working on in a way, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I remember one of the videos you posted on your channel that was really interesting to me was the one you did on orthogonal game design, or just designing with a variety of different experiences in mind.
Mm.
Um, I'd never heard that term either, but it makes perfect sense. Like, and rather than having very stagnant kind of like one note experience, it's better to vary the types of things that the player might do.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's the whole orthogonality thing is totally an immersive sim thing. As far as that's where I became familiar with it.
mhm,
People like Harvey Smith, who was the creative director on Deus Ex and Dishonored 2, um, and co-creative director on Dishonored 1. Um, he did a talk about it at GDC way back, probably like late 90s, maybe. I might be getting
mhm,
the date wrong, but apologies to Harvey if I've made him sound older than he is. But he did a talk about it a long time ago, and called orthogonal enemy differentiate, no, unit differentiation. And it's about the idea of differentiating between things in an orthogonal way, like I talk about in the video. And so it's very much kind of like trying to keep that torch kind of alive these days, because I think it's, like I say in the video, I think it's just a term that certainly all game designers should be familiar with. It's kind of fundamental quality of that different elements of a game or mechanics can have that allow you to create really interesting
mhm.
levels and situations because they combine in interesting ways. And so much
Yeah,
of level design and game design is kind of combining all these different things in interesting ways and finding things that combine well. Yeah.
I think one thing that really stood out to me after playing Dishonored, it may have been I I don't think it occurred to me until I had played Dishonored 2, but just something about it is very video gamey, and I don't know if that's like intentional or if that was even a goal. But there's some really simple mechanics that just feel really basic at their core, but then at the same time they're super interesting when they're all combined. Like,
Mm.
um, and it part of it probably is like the fact that like the healing items are like these massive canisters. It's some of it is the art and the way that it's presented. Some of it is just uh, I don't know, this the simplicity of the fact that you're healing yourself with this big syringe thing, or this whatever the red stuff is called, the Sokolov. I don't
Oh yeah,
remember
yeah. I can't
the
remember the
red
name of it
juice
either.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know. There's something about it that's just fun at its core, and it doesn't fuss around too much with I don't know. It's really hard for me to explain. It's kind of a gut feeling, but it just feels like a video game. It doesn't feel like it's taking itself too seriously, but at the same time, it's like super classical and like presented in a very beautiful way, artistically, in terms of like all the architecture and the art in the game and the story. But somehow it marries like this really simple, just gamey ass game with like I don't know, high fidelity, high polish story and art, and I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think there's the powers and actually kind of inherently very gamey in the sense that they provide you with loads of fun things to do, and a lot there's a lot of agency in the way you play it. I think that
Hmm.
might be what you're referring to in the gameplay side. But yeah, it is a really unusual mix of, and I think this is why the visual stylization of the art direction is so important,
Hmm.
because I think if it looked like a really realistic thing, it
Hmm.
wouldn't work at all. Like it needs that level of stylization for you to accept a lot of the kind of the magical stuff that you're doing, basically, but also and the nature of the stealth gameplay, for example, is the way the guards search for you in that game isn't how real guards look around and search for people.
Right.
But but I think with the right stylization, you accept it, and yet at the same time, it's realistic and kind of artful enough, and super artful. It's like gorgeous art
Hmm.
direction and stuff in a way that there's loads of artistry and kind of story and richness to it as well at the same time. So I would say like, yeah, it's I like those kind of games because they in a way they do take certain things like narrative, I think, a lot more seriously than
Hmm.
of a action or stealth games in a way, and the believability of their world. But then there's a sweet spot in the middle that it finds where it can kind of get the best from both in a way, which I think is pretty
Yeah.
hard to do. Yeah, to get all that fun, rich gameplay stuff, like really systemic, open gameplay stuff going on, but still be quite serious about how it all holds together fictionally and stuff. It's quite hard,
Yeah.
I think.
And
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm referring to. Like it's there's just something about it that's very simple in its approach, but
Mm,
it's conveying a more mature and like rich, detailed story, and
mm,
it's just really cool. Um, and that kind of, I guess, that kind of leads me to one of the things I wanted to talk about was the fun component, and like, how do you plan for fun, and how difficult is it to achieve fun when you're designing a level?
mm. I mean, in Dishonored 2 specifically, or in gen, like,
No, in general, you can. I mean, you could speak in terms of Dishonored too if you want to, but also any game
yeah,
you've worked on is fair game.
I mean, in terms, because to me, I suppose I come at this as of quite a narrative minded level designer. And
Mhm.
so fun is not always, I think to me, it's important to think about whether or not fun is is what the game is really about or what kind of fun. Um, you know, for example, with Dishonored 2, I often came at it thinking that what makes it interesting, like I say, is some of the I've thought about it in terms of interesting choices, let's say, rather than
Mhm.
fun in the traditional gamey sense. Um, and usually, interesting choices to me in the context of a Dishonored style game have a narrative framing to it, have a dramatic element to them. So it's
Mhm.
thinking about like an interesting choice in terms of choosing between. In the case of the Dust District, the level I worked on, it was about choosing between factions and hopefully thinking about what those factions represent in terms of ideology. And
Mhm.
in the case of the District and those two factions, it was the Howlers who were like a criminal faction, and the Overseers who were like these kind of religious zealots. Um, and the mission asks you, which one would you rather side with, if any? Because there's ways of not siding with either of them. So to me, the fun of Dishonored, and it's kind of goes back to the immersive thing. It's the idea of being put in, having an interesting choice or set of choices to make that is narratively interesting as well, and that makes you, want to think about what these choices kind of mean in terms of the game's world and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so that meant that I thought a lot about that level in terms of the story sequences I was putting in and the situations you get in, and whether or not you, yeah, like I say, which ones you choose to side with and how you feel about the ones which whoever you try to assassinate if you try
Yeah.
to do that. Little things like one of the little narrative scenes I put in the Overseer building, which you would presumably see if you're on the way to assassinate the leader of the Overseers,
Mhm.
would be there's a scene where an overseer is kind of mercy killing an overseer friend of his because he's been injured in a fight with the Howlers,
Mhm.
I wanted it to be as kind of an oddly intimate thing to see, where you realize there's a kind of there's a human side to these otherwise
Right.
quite kind of literally faceless because they all wear masks. These kind of faceless religious zealots who outside the overseer HQ they're executing people in public for breaking their religious laws, but inside the tower they're kind of dying and helping each other. And I thought that would be an interesting thing to see, a lot, like I say, on the way to assassinating their leader. That there's actually a little
Yeah.
more to them than the kind of like cartoonish. monsters that it would be easy to kind of stereotype them as. So anyway,
Yeah.
for me, Dishonored, a lot of the juice is where it's like surprisingly narratively interesting, and kind of and partly not because the gameplay kind of focused fun isn't important, but partly because the mechanics are so good in that game that they kind of take care of themselves. Like if you
Right.
make a narratively interesting level with stealth situations that kind of work and are robust and stuff, then the player will always have the tools to do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Right.
And so it's like that gamey fun is kind of taken care of you in a way, so long as you think about it, and you make something
Yeah.
robust that can stand up to it.
You've
Um,
also got the like all the bone charm hunting and stuff like that you could do if you really want to just go on a
yeah,
little item hunt.
yeah. But then my thing again was to kind of try and think of ways to, you know, every every time you place a bone charm or a rune or something like that, I was always trying to find a way to make it interesting. Some often from a narrative perspective. So for again,
Mhm.
for like with the overseers in that building, there's a place where there's you can find that there's runes and bone charms and stuff because the overseers have confiscated it from the
Oh
civilians that
yeah.
they're taking their houses from and stuff like this. So I kind of tried to weave in narrative stuff with that kind of the gameplay thing of finding all the power ups basically.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, you're like justifying it narratively. That's
yeah,
cool. I love Dishonored. I love the art in Dishonored. I love the gameplay, and I'm I'm really glad I found your channel because it sent me off on a path of like discovering how much I appreciate level design too. Are there any other games that you've worked on that you feel you really push the fun button to the max?
I would say the most recent one, well, definitely the most recent one, and also one where I was a lot. It was my job to do that the most. I think was Tactical Breach Wizards, this tactics game I worked on, and that released last year, almost exactly a year ago, actually.
Mhm.
Um, that is like it actually has a lot of parallels to an immersive sim in terms of the orthogonal design and the mechanics and how it's all about how things combine in an interesting way.
Mhm.
And it's one of the reasons I've recently been tooting my horn about the whole orthogonal game design thing because the game does it so well. And also, it was one of the nicest, most kind of fun, almost easy. I don't like to use the word, but it was very kind of like there was never a shortage of ideas for levels in that game because of the way the mechanics were designed and how many enemy types there were and how interesting and different they were. So, and that was a game, for people who haven't played it, it's like an indie tactics game, um, completely handcrafted in a way that in contrast to Into the Breach, for example, where everything is kind of procedurally generated and randomized
Mhm.
on the same size board every time and stuff like this. In this case, it's about 130 handcrafted levels. They're all different, completely different, and
And
that
they're
kind of
like
thing.
orthographic kind of
Yeah,
turn
similar.
based.
Yeah, similar orthographic view, and yeah, turn-based gameplay where but with this rewind mechanic that allows you to kind of try things out and then if you don't like how it works out then you can rewind it and just try something again.
That's
And
cool.
so that's another thing it has in common with Dishonored in the sense that it's all about experimenting and coming up
Mhm.
with your own interesting solutions to things. But yeah, in terms of just kind of trying to go all out on the fun of that, it was really just about kind of what I said earlier about trying to just see all of the potential in the game design that was on offer in terms of all the enemy types and how regularly we introduce new stuff. It's probably one of the most generous games I've worked on in terms of how frequently we're just introducing new stuff all the time. Not in a confusing way, I hope, but just new enemy types that genuinely change things,
Yeah.
and therefore they it makes it, like I say, much easier for me to just say, okay, well, I know we need new levels that show off why this enemy type is cool, and
Mhm.
so there feels like I was really happy with how little repetition there is in that game. In my certainly through the lens that I see it, because there's just always something new introduced, and therefore the level showcases why that's cool. And hopefully, it's just, I mean, the game's done really well, so I hope it did. It seems like it did come across as intended. It just feels like the game's always, it's never repeating itself, and it's always kind of just fun because of new situations that you're kind of presented with. So
Yeah.
that was a really fun thing to work on. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you've run out of ideas or like everything that you think of has already been done before and you're like I don't know. I guess I struggle with that in my own conceptual stuff when I'm trying to think
Right.
about different ways to approach the game that I'm making.
Do you mean
Um,
like from a level design perspective or a game design, or because I've got different answers
um,
for both? But like,
well,
yeah,
like
like
you mentioned, all the different enemy types and different abilities and things like that. Like
yeah.
I don't know how much of that you were authoring, but just do you find yourself thinking like, "Oh, this has already been done before"? I guess yeah,
I
in level design, you can be
I
answered.
didn't on Breach Wizards because the game is inherently quite unique within the genre, I think, and
Hmm.
also, like I said, because there were so many enemy designs and they were orthogonally different to each other, like I talk about in the video.
Yeah.
That's the thing that made it so that I was always like, oh yeah, there's totally a new thing. The whole
Hmm.
point of every enemy type was that it introduces something new to the gameplay, and so in the case of that game, I did I yeah it felt unusually easy to come up with decently quite original stuff for it. I hope because it's all quite unique to the enemy types and the way the game works.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I find that in terms of as a level designer trying to come up with original ideas, it's so much kind of the potential of it is determined by the game you're working on. And
Yeah.
so some games are way easier to be a level designer on in terms of having original ideas because the game design elements lend themselves to fresh ideas. Whereas other games are kind of kind of more like other games, or maybe just the mechanics they have just aren't that interesting in terms of genuinely different situations that you can create with
Hmm.
them, and then it becomes hard to be a level designer on those kind of
Yeah.
games. Yeah.
How is it? I know you talk a lot about using level editors as opposed to like a game engine as for level design tools.
Mm.
Um, how is it working at so many different studios and for different games that have different engines that you might not be familiar with? And like, I've always been confused by how someone prepares to work in a role with if they're not familiar with the engine because it's like a proprietary engine or
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't know.
to be honest, it's like so when I've talked about like using level editors instead of game engines, that's specifically in the context of like an aspiring level designer trying to create portfolio work
Uh-huh.
where you can show people that you've made real levels that are actually playable and you've really made fully playable finished things. It's much
Hmm.
easier to do that with an editor for an existing game than try and basically make your own game or work with some kind of
Right.
something you bought off the store, which will never be as good as a real game.
Hmm.
But in terms of joining new studios and like how do you get to grips with the um, tools, it's kind of, but ultimately, at the end of the day, like every single team you ever work on, every game you work on, and with every team, there will be new technology and tools made for that game. There is no
Hmm.
game where you just take an engine off the shelf and just
Yeah.
like it's already there. Just make the levels.
Right.
Like that, the programming team and the game designers are always designing new things for you. And
Hmm.
so even if you're like super experienced in Unreal 5 or whatever, if you work on a new Unreal 5 game, that team will have made loads of new tools and scripting stuff and content and stuff. So that's just inherent to the job that you're learning. Well, usually you're learning like lots of editor stuff. Although that was another nice thing about Tactical Breach was that it by the time I started on the project, they'd already made the level editor that they used to make the first act of the game, and it was basically ready to go. Like there was more
Okay.
enemy types and stuff to be made, but it was ready to go, and it was built into it's the level editor that ships with the game as well. It's built into the game, so instead of having to learn loads of technical Unity stuff to work on the game, I literally just loaded up the game and went into the editor. And it's
Oh,
a kind
that's
of
fun.
it's a kind of user friendly player facing editor. So it was really
That's
easy to use, and that was super. That was probably the least technical work I've ever had to have working on a game in that sense, which
that's
was nice.
cool.
I literally sent over a playable level on day 1 or 2 of starting that job because it was the levels were so small and the editor was just ready, which is amazing. Um, but yeah, I would
It's
say
like
like the
Mario Maker or something like that.
yeah, effectively something of similar complexity to Mario Maker. Yeah,
That's
even simpler, really. and the levels are smaller than a Mario level typically is.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was really nice in that sense because I'm not a huge. I've never been into the technical side of level design and game development. It's never been my favorite bit or my
Yeah.
strongest bit. So the lighter these days that I can keep the technical side, the more the more I'm into it. But yeah, but like, having said that, yeah, like I said, the tools are always different on every game, and they're always built, even within the same engine. They're always built. Um, Unique things are built for every game because every game's different. And then paradoxically, even when games use different engines, there will be some similarities because I'm going off my experience on Dishonored 2 here. We basically made our own engine for that thing. We took it Tech
Hmm.
5 and gutted it. I say we, all the programmers. Obviously, I had
Right.
nothing to do with it, but they gutted all the features of Tech 5 and basically made everything from scratch. But a lot of stuff that they made was broadly similar to what Unreal has, but
Right.
just different and kind of customized to what we were doing, and and all that kind of thing. So there's always similarities, but there's also stuff you learn on every project, and with the tools, it's always
Yeah.
broadly the same, but always different in a weird way. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. It's not like you're. I mean, you have to kind of gear up and learn the project no matter where you go and what project you're on. It's like it's a whole reset pretty much every time, I assume.
yeah.
Um, um, you mentioned something about the programming side or the technical side is not your most favorite part.
Mm.
Um, Same here. I'm not a programmer at all. I've learned a little bit of blueprints and a little bit of like visual scripting and stuff like that for the game that I'm making. Is there any is there anything that you do or that you have been doing lately that you've incorporated some of that stuff and maybe like gotten a little bit more experience with it?
With the technical side of things, like I mean, in terms of my current job, um, super fortunately for me, in at Half Mermaid, we have another lead level designer who's more experienced than me and is the lead technical level designer. And it turns out that I mean, he's great to work with, and he's super technical in a way that I didn't even know level designers would be. I mean, he's also been a lead game designer. He was the lead game designer on Still Wakes the Deep, a
Oh,
really cool horror game that came out last year, this year, last year. I can't remember now. Time's flying, but
yeah.
fortunately for me, on this project, which because I don't know if it's been announced, but we're working on Unreal 5. I think that is announced. It's
Okay.
public, but it's an Unreal 5 thing, and he's just shipped a game on Unreal 5, and he's like, but not only that, but he's super technical, and fortunately is there to kind of cover all of that stuff for level design and work with the other departments to do all the technical stuff, which is cool.
Yeah.
But in terms of my own, like places where I am trying to be more technical, like I've started working on my own. Well, to be honest, I've been prototyping. I've been trying to prototype stuff in Unity for about God forever now. It's probably getting on about 10, 11 years since Unity became a big thing.
Yeah.
I got into that, and I've been teaching myself on and off C# programming,
Oh wow.
and yeah, which is something that like was a real struggle for ages. And even before Unity, I tried to find a way to learn how to program because the idea of doing the indie thing and make my own game was always interesting. But I
Hmm.
just couldn't find a way to learn programming. And then Unity, thankfully, had some really nice tutorial projects and stuff, and I finally got into it slowly with that. And now I'm at the point where I'm definitely still not a good programmer at all. I'm definitely not. But I
That's okay.
can, in my weird hacky way, I can do quite a lot now is so long as I can find my own weird hacky way of doing it. And
Yeah.
so for the case of programming like a prototype or something that will work and kind of get where I can explore the game design, I feel like
Hmm.
I can do stuff now, and I'm one of the reasons I'm excited about the thing I'm working on at the moment, and I hope to kind of take it all the way, really long term, sometime in the future, after I ship the game of Half Mermaid.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like I've found a project that works around a load of technical stuff that I don't want to do, and
Yeah.
scope stuff as well. Like the two things that are always the kind of the curse and the blockers in any indie project for me are basically technical things and scope. Obviously,
Yeah.
scope. Like scope's always a nightmare, and I feel like I found a game where it's like, oh, this can look cool and feel quite, fully fleshed out and stuff. Um, Even with just me working on it, without too much support needed from a programmer. I'll need a programmer to help me ship it, I think, when the time
Mhm.
comes. But for now, I can kind of dirtily hack it all together myself and get quite good results. And so that feels like a real something I'm quite excited about. I feel like I've found a project that suits what I want to do and avoids the stuff that I don't want to do, which is
Yeah.
like so the game doesn't currently, certainly in terms of gameplay, the game doesn't involve any human characters for example. So there's no
That's a good
animation, there's
idea.
no human, stuff to depict and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's a very level designy game, but with fairly simple mechanics that mean that I don't that I can implement them myself, basically. So that's a really interesting and kind of yeah exciting now that finally found that project that feels like, oh, I could actually do this, I think, and get
Yeah,
some help
that's really
later.
cool.
But yeah, we'll see.
That's
Um,
super cool. I've done a little bit of like I've definitely blown the scope thing out of
yeah.
or I've overscoped in the game that I'm working on and had to pull it back, and like I just kind of buckled down and started programming a few mechanics myself. Just like at one point I was using like a template project where it had all kinds of like opening doors and things like that that were already programmed. But then at some point I just felt like I needed to understand how that stuff was working so that I could use it for other reasons, like for other other needs that I had.
Hmm.
And so I just started in Blueprint in Unreal 5, scripting my own little stuff. And once I started doing that, I I did feel like, okay, if I can simplify this idea down enough, then I can actually build these little small components that I can make something interesting out of. In the game that you're making, is it a matter of mechanical simplicity? You mentioned not having like human characters, which is a huge deal because
Hmm.
yeah, you don't have to incorporate any animations and stuff. But
Yeah, and there's things like that, like no human characters, but also like in terms of the environments, for example, it's a 3D game, which
mm-hmm,
sounds like, oh, that's way too much work. But it's taking place, the visual fidelity is quite low, kind of PlayStation 1 or 2 with
mm-hmm,
some effects on top. But also it all takes place underground. And so far at least, because of the relative low fidelity of things, I've gotten away with building most of my environments out of the same rock mesh, just rotated and scaled and stuff. And you get away with it. And that's kind of a level designer's dream, that basically something as simple as a block out
mm-hmm,
could look okay enough to ship.
yeah,
Eventually I'd want nicer rocks made, but
yeah,
for now I can literally make something that kind of you know looks decent on my own and just with the same mesh. So there's no, you know, there's not like completely handcrafted, unique cliff faces or anything like that. It's just one rock mesh I'm using everywhere. So that's also another kind of huge saving that feels like it suits my skill set. You know,
yeah.
um, yeah,
I think that's part of what freaks me out when I look at the whole picture is like knowing what my skill set is and seeing all the other things that go into game development that I'm not good at or I don't have very much experience doing. So, um,
yeah. It's
yeah.
tricky if I mean if you kind of you know because in your case you're kind of coming from a different industry background and all this kind of thing. I kind of got
Mhm,
into games like straight like from university onwards kind of thing. So it's like all I've
mhm,
been doing. But like yeah, it's kind of, and I've been kind of more focused. My career's been 80-90% level design, um, which has been kind of like it means I've gotten very comfortable with, depending on the game I'm working on, fairly comfortable with what I'm doing and stuff. But then obviously, like the technical thing basically is
mhm,
something where I feel like, oh yeah, a lot of people I know, even level designers, are just more technical than me, and I don't know how to deal with. I don't know how to. I can't compete with that, and I don't even
Yeah.
want to because I don't enjoy that kind of work and stuff. So just figuring out who you are and what works for you, what doesn't, and then what kind of projects, can really kind of like fit that is everything really. And like I say, it's taken me over 10 years of prototyping random little things to think, oh, I could. And maybe that, to be honest, maybe there's been a few of us um that I could have done technically and that
Hmm.
were reasonably interesting. But this one's, I'm hoping it's like the one that ticks all the boxes, or enough of them that I should finish this one. We'll see. But and like I say, it's alongside I'm chipping away at it slowly alongside my job at Half Mermaid. So that's also a different thing, where I can
Yeah.
I know I've got time and I can chip away.
Right.
Um,
And that's
yeah.
exciting. It's nice to have something that like it kind of occupies your fantasy in your mind while you're working away.
Mm.
Um, I also have a day job, so it's the game development stuff happens in the margins. Um, but it's nice to have something that I'm passionate about that I'm always thinking about the story in my mind. I'm rolling it around and what kinds of things might be interesting. And I don't know. There's something romantic about having it still in progress. So part of like I don't know what it would feel like to ship or to finish it because then it would be over.
Hmm.
Um, but
Generally,
yeah,
what I hear about shipping games is that it's so hard that when it's done, it's like, thank God. But especially like like solo indie or very small stuff. Yeah, it's a bit like. But I know what you mean. Yeah, it's definitely easy to feel that like the early. I think it's very common that like in a way the start of things and being in the middle of things is kind of well, especially the start is kind of the fun bit, and then it's the
hmm
easiest bit to enjoy. I find that people often say in the industry that it's like it's the middle bit that's the hardest, where
hmm
you've been working on it for a while and you've kind of committed to it in a way, but also you're still trying to, especially in AAA, like you're still trying to make loads of stuff and it's nothing's probably ready. Like
yeah,
everything's probably work in progress and nobody can really do their stuff to the full quality level and all that kind of thing. And you can be a year or two into a project and still not
hmm
know if things are going to come together and be in that state for like a year, which is quite
yeah,
a kind of anxious, long period of time. And so, yeah, that once you've committed to a thing, like the middle and the kind of just past the middle is often the tough bit.
yeah.
But then hopefully by the end of it, it's quite exciting because then you're just like, oh, this is real. And, you're
hmm
really polishing the kind of stuff that might actually make it into the game in as it is, and that's
Yeah,
kind of, yeah. So long as it's not too crunchy and horrible, that's quite a satisfying phase of the game
yeah.
to be shipping. Yeah.
Uh, what is your take on the whole yellow paint debate in terms of level design? And I
All
guess
right.
it's maybe an environment art thing or a game design thing, but
Well, no, I think of it as a level design thing, but my word, like, I've definitely got my gut feelings on this, but for context, I don't, I haven't read much of the discourse on this, so I only have a superficial understanding of what it is. But
mhm,
basically, if it's basically a backlash against like, you know, blatant signposting of what you're supposed to do in a way that doesn't make sense in that game,
mhm,
and that also takes away from the feeling that you're actually exploring and thinking about what you should do in a way that is immersed in the game. I am against that. Like, you know, I like to think, Dishonored, even though there is actually one case in Dishonored 1, which I was quite surprised to see early on in the game, that there is actually there's clearly a bit of paint splashed on something to draw
mhm.
attention to something. It's kind of a one off though. In Dishonored, generally, we're super not into that because we generally don't need it. It's kind of like in the case of Dishonored, we don't need to there is no yellow paint telling you where you can climb because the rule in that game is that you've got a blink power that you can point at things and it tells you whether or not you can climb it. And
Yeah,
also the rule in that game is that if anything looks like you can climb it, you can. And
yeah,
it's like we've designed the whole thing with that in mind. So coming from that kind of school of game design, I am generally very like super anti yellow paint. Um, I'm not anti games where it makes sense to just call it
mhm,
out, but I definitely think and I won't name names, but there are definitely some games where it's like that felt like a lazy solution to a problem that you could have solved better. And
Yeah.
I think we should always aspire to not have to resort to that stuff, because I, not like I said, not because of the, there's one side of it, like I said, is the kind of immersion breaking thing of it not being believable
Mhm.
that it would be there. The other thing though is that it's just like, if you're just calling out, especially in a linear game, if you're just calling things out like that with yellow paint, it just completely destroys the player's need to, or ability to to play it by exploring, by being immersed in the world and thinking, oh, where should I go? Maybe I can do that. Maybe that was, like,
Right.
so like, that's the bigger deal for me actually, is kind of undermining the player's experience of exploring on their own terms, and actually kind
Yeah.
of like, yeah,
Yeah, I've had that game. I mean, that I've had that experience with NPCs too. Like, it's not paint, but it's like there's an NPC following you around that's telling you exactly what to do and where to
yeah,
go,
that
and
kind
that
of,
always really bugs me. It's like you didn't even give me long enough to like look
yeah.
around to see what the problem was.
I think I might know. I know of a game where everybody said that about it. Yeah, I know what you mean. And it's like, and I think with the thing is, I think what leads people to those kind of solutions is that, like, it's a triple A thing, in the sense that triple A games just have to work for so many more people. It's kind of like,
Hmm.
if you're like a massive triple A game, then you have to, you're considered a failure, and you economically you are a failure if your game doesn't make back all the insane amount of money that was spent making the game. So it has
Right.
to appeal to millions of players. And if it's a linear game that with puzzles in, for example, that the player has
Hmm.
to figure out, then unless you give the option to skip them and stuff, which most AAA games don't, we do that in, for what it's worth, in Tactical Breach Wizards. You can skip every single level in the game because we just don't want anyone stuck. But in a
Yeah.
AAA game where you can't skip the levels, if anyone gets stuck, then they just can't play the rest of the game. And if it's a
Right.
puzzle where maybe 1 in 100 people get stuck, if you've got 5 million players, 1 in 100 people is 50,000 players who get stuck,
Yeah.
right? And so they need to make sure that you don't get stuck. But as always, I think there's better solutions than some of the. I'm guessing it's just like time and,
Yeah.
sheer kind of, the sheer weight of AAA development that kind of
Right.
stops
You
those things
you
being
have to move the
massaged
player
into it,
along.
with
Right.
nicer solutions and stuff. But yeah, I'm definitely always for delivering on the actual experience of the game, whether it's like feeling like you're an adventurer exploring a space, or like
Mhm.
just solving things for yourself, or whatever. Just like, it's the whole point of level design to me, to give an authentic experience of that, rather than just
Yeah.
kind of show them something that looks like you're doing that, but really the game's doing it for you or something. I'm really not into that,
Right. And
and yeah,
as a player, that's what I appreciate is when a game trusts me enough to use my brain. Um,
right.
there
And
are the
sorry, go on.
sorry, go ahead. No,
Oh,
you go
I was just going to say, there are games where I feel like, I think there are ways to master, like the Portal games to me, are the ones that spring to mind, in terms of like, that's a super linear Portal puzzle game where there's only
Mhm.
one solution that you to the puzzle, and you've got to figure it out or you can't progress. But they've just play tested the hell out of it so that they know how players think and how players
Mhm.
behave, and they just know that it's going to work. And it's, Valve can do that because they've got infinite money and resources and a lot of time.
Yeah.
But the point is there that you can do this stuff without compromising the integrity of the experience and stuff. It's just
Mhm.
hard, and you've got to care about it enough to prioritize that in development. I suppose that's
Yeah.
another thing, is that I just feel like, you know some not everyone, even designers on some of these teams, not everyone is as sensitive to this stuff as other people, and therefore it just doesn't get prioritized. And when development is hard, as it always is, things
Mhm.
that aren't the priorities just, kind of fall by the wayside a bit.
Yeah, it's like
And so,
wrap it up. We gotta move
yeah.
on.
So it's, or, somebody's doing their best, but I just can't, they don't have time because everything's
Mhm.
expensive to change and all this kind of thing. um so yeah,
Yeah.
it's, definitely don't want to say, have a go at the developers, because there's always a context that makes these problems kind of hard to avoid. But
Right.
as a designer, I think it's always good to remember that there's always ways to do these things. And if you prioritize it, you can make it happen. Uh,
That makes sense. I have one more question, one more level design question, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience with your YouTube channel.
Hmm.
But this this one question kind of occurred to me in I think it might have been it might have been your last video that you posted on the designing levels for different abilities that the player may or may not have.
Hmm.
Um, I have been rattling around trying to decide like the game that I'm making. I want to make. Ideally, it would be somewhat of an immersive sim, but not necessarily as robust and systemic as you
Hmm.
know something like Dishonored. Um, but I would like to have like a sense of exploration and a sense of player agency and all that kind of stuff. But I also like the original inspiration behind the game that I'm making is like a lock and key kind of Resident Evil sort of horror experience.
Hmm.
So my question to you, I guess, is like, do you think that there's room for that sort of lock and key puzzle based mechanics in an immersive sim sort of approach, or are those two completely different
The lock and key
things?
mechanics, as in,
As in,
um,
like in Resident Evil, you're in. Let's take Resident Evil 2 for example. Um, I don't know. Have you played it?
I played a bit of it, not all the way through, so I might not know the bit you're talking about.
Okay.
Um,
So you're basically in one location, at least for the majority of the first act of the game. You're in a police station, and your certain doors are locked, and you have to find your way through the police station and solve puzzles in order to find the key to unlock the door that then allows you to progress. So if I guess my question is like, if the only way through that door is to find that one key that's locked behind a puzzle, how immersive simmy can it be? Like
right.
I,
I mean, I
I
think there's
guess.
always well, we use locked doors and keys in Dishonored
Mm-hmm,
in the sense that they, and this is it's quite a fundamental thing that allows you to create a sense of structure and kind of I think it can totally fit within as well, especially within the context of Dishonored levels, which are very large.
mm-hmm,
You can totally be an element within that kind of thing. You know, I I don't think lock and key. Well, it does kind of imply linearity if there's only one key, for example. But maybe I don't know. Depending on the game, there could be more than one key, and all
true.
that kind of thing. Or the key might not be the only way to get through the door or
Mm-hmm,
get into that building. So the yeah, there's totally room for like that. If I'm understanding you correctly, like that kind of thing as an element within a thing can
mm-hmm.
totally still be part of like a non-linear thing, a systemic thing. Um, yeah, because the classic thing would be that like I'm trying to think. It's probably I think if Deus Ex is the classic one for this, like if you have a maybe old fantasy game like Dark Messiah and stuff, if a key if you have a locked door and a key, like I say, the key might be a way to open the door. Maybe you don't even need to get into that room, so it's an optional thing in itself. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can destroy the door. Maybe you can climb in through a window and enter the building from a different thing. And so there's definitely it's all about how with the immersive sim thing and the kind of that kind of level design. It's always about the idea that there's multiple ways of doing things, and therefore that can extend to things like keys and
Yeah.
doors and you know whether or not you even need to go through that door and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite moments in Dishonored was when I realized that I didn't need a key to get through a door, and I just threw a canister of whale oil at it,
Right,
and it
right.
obliterated the wooden door. I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and even on the other side, I would also say that like I am not like even if a locked door and a key thing was used to actually impose a bit of linearity and structure in that
Hmm.
sense to on the level, that can be fine too. Like I don't feel like the whole point of, well, no, in a way, the point, Dishonored levels are all about like non-linearity to various degrees, but then at the same time, that doesn't mean you can't have some, you know,
Hmm.
what's the word? Not tunneling. I should know this word. It's been a long time. Choke
Funneling.
points and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, the idea of like funneling and or certain bits where you just know that this beat or this thing in that room is something that you like. The first part of the district level is when you make your way to Megan, who gives you
Hmm.
the objective info and stuff. There's lots of ways that you can. There's a section with guards and stuff in the first area before that, but you have to, however you do that section,
Hmm.
you always have to meet Megan, and that was kind of a constraint I was given because we knew we didn't want players to not be able to talk to Megan in that mission. And
Yeah.
so there's that's an element of linearity within the larger level of still while still supporting a lot of choice before and
Yeah.
after that choke point.
So
So
in
it's
that, I'm sorry.
well, so I'm just saying like anything goes really, like it's whatever serves the game, and you know
Hmm.
lots of things can be used in different ways.
So in that point, in that part specifically, you had to limit the like the player didn't have spots that they could blink to necessarily, or like you had to funnel through that building. I think.
Yeah, there are actually
Already.
multiple ways to enter the building, but you have to go into that building, and all of them lead to a door that,
Hmm.
with Megan on the other side of the
Yeah,
door.
I remember
Yeah, so yeah, and I don't think nobody complained about that. It's just a
that.
thing that um, to me it also made sense because Megan and her briefing is kind of the start of the real mission in a way. So everything
Hmm.
before that was kind of an introduction to the Dust District, and we tried to kind of have some big moments like the first. You arrive by boat with Sokolov, you go through these very cold,
Hmm.
wet kind of tunnels, underground kind of canal
Hmm.
area, and then we deliberately make you go through a tiny little tunnel, and then suddenly you're in this wide open view of the not the
Yeah.
dust district itself, but a view from the dust district. And we deliberately designed that the tunnel area at the start to contrast with that big vista, to kind of
Hmm.
accentuate the impact of the view and stuff. And then the building that Megan is in is there's a big room before that where you see it's kind of this cool building that's flooded with sand and dust, basically, to the
Hmm.
point where it changes the way you navigate it a bit. And all the windows are kind of clapping open with the breeze coming through
Yeah.
the windows and stuff. And so that first section was all about the district and kind of introducing you to the vibe of the place and stuff like that. But then we funnel you into the briefing, and then it's really open after that.
Hmm.
So that kind of structural stuff is, to me, that's level design. Really, it's like deciding how to structure things is
Yeah.
the level design.
That's
It's not
cool.
like there can't be any structure because we're doing non-linear. It's
Hmm.
never really that. It's always designing the structure so that it feels cool, you know. And you
How
get the
many
best of
times?
both worlds, of structure and openness, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're gonna.
Oh, I was just gonna say, how many times did you shuffle some of the parts of the district around? Like, I guess you said you worked on it for like 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it's crazy to say
Yeah.
that out loud. It sounds insane, but like, yeah, basically for most of, well, it was the main mission I was assigned to on that
Yeah.
game, and I was there working on the game for 3 years, and stayed for another 6 months to kind of work on the start of the DLC. But then, yeah, in terms of how much we shuffled things around, I mean, to be honest, and I touched on this with I did a talk way back at the Digital Dragons conference in Warsaw in Poland. After I had worked on Dishonored 2, I did a talk about creative process for level designers, and I
Hmm.
talked about how because of my approach, I mean, it sounds a bit kind of makes it sound easier than it was, but like broadly speaking, I tried to approach the design of the level purely based on what I knew needed to be the case because of things like we want you to meet Megan, and also
Hmm.
because of how complicated the mission was, we knew that we needed to use Megan to inform the player about all this how this mission works because it's quite complicated and unique. So I basically designed it along. I tried to. I think it's good to generally try and design things in order of what needs to be true, your constraints,
Yeah.
um, and then assuming that those constraints don't change, the fundamentals of your design shouldn't need to change. But then, and hopefully, the stuff you're changing is lower levels of. detail,
Yeah,
rather than like, oh shit, we need to restart the whole level because we got it wrong because we
yeah,
didn't understand the
just
constraints, right? Um,
refinement, basically.
I mean, in on paper, yeah, and theoretically, in practice, to be honest, like in some ways, um, that there was some ways that I wish we could have changed the layout more, iterated on the layout more.
Hmm.
But it was kind of tricky at times because of um, how we worked on it in terms of it not being made in a super modular way. And so once we kind of committed to a design, it was kind of the broad strokes of it were kind of in place, in a way that I would have loved to have been a bit later on in the process so that we could have
Yeah,
iterated more on it. But yeah, the broad strokes of it never really changed, and thankfully it kind of worked. you know,
good.
um, yeah,
Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed that level.
cool.
Um, I guess I kind of forgot to mention, or forgot to ask you. Sort of the whole point of this conversation was to get a feel for your process, and I know that you've made videos about this, like the text first approach that you have.
Hmm.
Um, but can you just kind of like briefly like give me a
Like an overview of.
yeah, just an overview or a basic approach that you would
Hmm.
from zero to complete how you might approach a level design project.
Right. I mean, I would say it's step one. Is always before you even think about a level is understanding what the game is. Like it sounds kind of obvious, but then it's like, um, I think a lot of, I mean, it's just it's absolutely fundamental to what you're doing. It's often it's hard to give an answer for this kind of question because it's so specific to different games, and
Mhm.
really all the answers come from knowing specifically what your game is. So for example, to me, a video I'm thinking of making soon actually is like the idea of ignoring genre, because well, it sounds a bit dramatic. It's like for example, when I worked on Dishonored 2, I didn't play Metal Gear Solid again, and I didn't go play Hitman as a reference. I
Mhm.
didn't play any other stealth games. I played Dishonored a lot, Dishonored 1, but like I didn't really care what other stealth games are doing because it's it's mostly irrelevant, like because they're different games. Like to
Mhm.
me, the best level design for any game is the level design that could only be in that game. So in Dishonored, the best ideas for a Dishonored level and for bits of a Dishonored level are all specific to what Dishonored is and showcase why Dishonored is unique and cool. Right?
Mhm.
I don't want you as Corvo or Emily to do stuff that the guy from Hitman could do. Like that would be
Right.
just like, why am I doing this? Why aren't I doing weird supernatural stuff? Why aren't I experiencing stories and ideas that are unique to Karnaca or the Dust District, right? And
Mhm.
so to me, it's like, the first thing of any game is like really understanding what the game is and why it's different and interesting, and trying to express that. And often when you see level design that maybe less experienced designers do, that just doesn't maybe looks like a level and looks like
Yeah.
you could make that. Often it's not right because it feels like it's a bit from the wrong game, and
Mhm.
they're just kind of still kind of copying the wrong game. They're
Yeah.
making, I don't know, you might be working on a third person horror game, but they made a level that looks a bit like a Gears of War level, and Gears of War is a different kind of game and that kind of thing.
Right. A cover
Um,
shooter or
so
whatever.
that's the, I mean, it's not the process thing, but it's the very first, it's the most important thing at the start of the process, I think. And
Mhm.
everything kind of extends from that. It's like, okay, within the context of this hopefully uniquely cool game, there's things like where does this level take place in the campaign? What is the point of this level in relation to other levels and stuff like that? Um, and so I basically, I suppose the broadest way to talk about this is that I'm really logical about things in the sense that it has to make sense why you're doing things, and it's for me it's very rarely just like, oh, I had a random cool idea. Hopefully it will work. Like it's
Mhm.
more like understanding what I'm doing and trying to, um, yeah, like I say. So for example, in the Dust Districts, um, one of the things I thought about was the fact that the level was right before the time travel level, which was undoubtedly going to be one of the coolest, like big high concept, crazy
Yeah.
levels in the game. And so I was like, okay, if my level is kind of the streets level before the
Mhm.
cool time travel building mission, then I should be cool in a different way. And my level, that the district also was unique for having two factions and making a choice between them. So I was like, okay, so this is a good level to go deep on the world building side of the game. Not that they won't be doing that in the time travel mission and on the other missions, but specifically the ideology of the factions and stuff. That should be what this level is about, and
Mhm.
it's maybe the job of this level in the context of the game to do that. And so I thought about that in terms of the context of the game and all that kind of thing. Um, and then also, to be honest, another key factor with in the case of that mission was thinking about, okay, then so how can I do this mission that lets you choose between two factions, or maybe not even choose a faction? How can I do that without making two levels and just making an
Mhm.
insanely complex level that is basically twice the work of a normal level? So a lot of the thinking went through that, like thinking about scope and like, okay, this could be a nightmare if I do this wrong. How can I
Yeah.
avoid that being, So that led to quite a kind of small circular layout for the level instead of, some kind of V-shaped massive branching thing where I'm kind of making two massive tunnel levels.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. In that case, it was like I say, it started off with thinking about high level. What's cool about Dishonored? What context does this level play in the campaign? And then what are the practical realities of like trying to do what this level is supposed to do in terms of the constraints and stuff. Um, in terms of the whole text-based thing, I did use that a similar process that I show in my videos. I did use that for the Dust District, just because I like to think I was doing some of it earlier today actually for a level that I'm trying to figure out on my own game.
That's
Um,
cool.
just like yeah, I just find basically thinking in Notepad is just the
Mhm.
most useful thing for me because it's I don't tend to draw because, or at least drawing comes later, because again, text is about figuring out the logic of what I'm even trying to do.
Mhm.
And so I often literally just write down questions like, why is this idea interesting? Or like, what should this level be about? Or sometimes if I'm really stuck on something and I'm getting a bit anxious because I haven't figured something out, I'll write down like, why are you stuck? Or like, I'll ask myself really direct questions as if I was talking to myself,
Yeah.
but then just talk through it in very plain terms of like, why isn't this level working? And I'll be like, to be honest, it's kind of boring. It's like I've done this before, or like that, this mechanic this isn't as interesting as I thought it was going to be, or whatever. And I find
Right.
just thinking to myself in text is really, it's kind of, do you know the term rubber ducking? It's a bit
Uh,
related to this. It's a programming kind of oriented
I've heard it,
thing.
but I'm drawing a blank. What does it mean?
So basically, rubber ducking, as far as I understand it, I might get some of these details wrong, but it's apparently a term that came from programming, but is a game development thing in general, because it's basically the idea that when you're stuck on something, like something's not working, maybe you're programming something and it's just not working, or you've scripted something and it doesn't work as it
Mhm.
should. You ask somebody else to like take a look at it, and it's like, why doesn't this work? I was just trying to do this, and then I set this up like that, and then often in the process of talking to
Uh,
somebody about the problem, you realize by saying it out loud, like, oh no, it's just that. It's because I've done
yeah.
that. And it's you don't often it's in that case it's not really like they helped solve the problem for you. It's just that talking to someone helped you solve it yourself. And so
Yeah.
the joke is that you could just have a rubber duck on your desk and talk to the rubber duck, and that would help you solve the problems.
Yeah.
And so I think the term is used as if like just rubber ducking. It's just like talking to something or someone, just but talking about the problem out loud is just another way of helping you think in a way that will solve the problem.
Yeah. That's
Anyway,
really
so
cool.
that's I think the reason I mention that is because it vaguely relates to the why I kind of use Notepad as just a way
Mhm.
to kind of think about things and sometimes talk to myself and ask, because advice is always easier to give when you're giving it to somebody else
Oh
rather than trying
yeah.
to understand what to do yourself.
I think it's really smart to get it down too, because I have so many ideas that sometimes I get just this kind of like think in circles a little bit, and I'll have a story idea that I want to. I'm like, that's a great idea. I need to build around that as like the core idea for this specific section.
Mm.
But then like I'll just think about it, and then like a week will pass, and I'll be like cutting the grass or something and think about something else that piggybacks off of that idea and
Yeah,
completely flips it on its head. And so I'm like, I without getting it written down, I feel like I'll just circle around and reinvent the wheel 100 times before I actually commit to something. So
right. Yeah.
uh, I don't know if you experience any of that.
Oh, for sure. And I
Just
think just like, yeah, change. I thought you were going to say with the mowing the lawn thing. Like, people talk about like having great ideas when they're in the shower and in bed and stuff. I think
mhm,
there's also when it comes to like ideas and stuff, just stepping. First of all, just stepping away from the computer
mhm,
and also embrace like because I think when you're at the computer, you're kind of you feel your body feels like, oh, I'm only doing stuff if I'm like typing things into the computer, or I'm building
mhm.
something, and it's not a great place to think really, because you end up thinking a in a bit of a rush, and b in terms of the tools that you've got on the screen.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you're stepping away from it, having lunch, going for a walk, having a shower, whatever, mowing the lawn, you can it kind of lets people talk about letting their subconscious think about it, rather than your
Yeah.
conscious brain, and that makes a huge difference to me. So like I always like I'm quite happy. So I've just moved house recently, and like I finally have an office big enough that I can have a little armchair there, and
Uh-huh.
it's really important to me to just sit on the armchair sometime while I'm thinking, instead of, even though it's just there, it's a meter away,
Mhm.
but sitting on an armchair where I'm not at the computer just helps me think a bit more differently, I find, and more openly, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Now
Rather
there's
than like trying to
definitely
think while you're pushing brushes around in the hammer editor or whatever, just get
yeah.
away from the computer. And yeah.
It's definitely I've had epiphanies while mowing the lawn or doing just repetitive, super repetitive tasks that just allows your brain to kind of drift. Things occur to me more frequently when I'm not trying too hard. Like when
Yeah.
I'm not trying to force myself to have an idea,
Yeah, totally.
then it's like it opens up the door for ideas to come.
Yeah, totally.
Um, but
I mean,
anyway,
there's a whole level design thing there, in the sense of, and I've talked about this recently somewhere. The whole like the way you think being changed by how much pressure you're under, in a way. That's
mhm,
a really fundamental level design thing, where it's like, and it's central to like both, Dishonored 2 and the Tactical Breach Wizards. When you want the players to think in a creative way and come up with their own solutions for stuff, you can't pressure them too much, because when
yeah,
we're kind of putting ourselves under pressure, or we feel it, then we're just kind of like a rat looking for the exit. Like
yeah.
we're not thinking creatively at all.
Right.
And
You don't want to sit in that feeling for too long. You just want to hurry up and get out of there. You
right,
don't
right,
want to like poke around and find.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. You don't want to explore.
yeah. So yeah, it's all connected, this stuff.
Oh yeah. Um, well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your YouTube stuff, but I don't know that we have a whole lot of time left. I don't know
I'm happy
what is you.
to try and squeeze, squeeze it in a bit. I could do another, I don't know, 10 minutes, if that
Yeah,
works.
yeah, that'd be good.
Mm.
So basically, I've found a lot of useful, inspiring information on your YouTube channel and within your Discord community. There's a lot of really good, uh, really good people, really knowledgeable people, professionals and novice level designers that are just trying to understand the process. Um, how do you find the time and how do you find the motivation or like the the whole YouTube side of this thing? Can you just talk to me a little bit about what it's like to be a game developer that has a YouTube channel?
Right, right.
Uh, has it positively impacted you? Has it negatively impacted you, or
Oh,
both?
I
Or
mean, I'm really simply, I'd definitely say it's been a positive thing. I'm really happy I've done it. I would, regarding how I find time to do it. I mean, for a long time, up until about a month ago, the answer was I don't find time to do it, and because I hadn't made a video in 8 months, but and that was due to a combination of like having to move around a bunch and also like getting into my game thing and that
Hmm.
becoming a thing that kind of sucks up that some of that time. But no, I've really enjoyed it, and it's like it's been interesting. There's so many different aspects to it. I've kind of enjoyed finally starting something that's mine in a way.
Yeah.
Like as you know, it's kind of in terms of making something and putting it out there and seeing how people feel about it and making more and building on that.
Hmm.
It's been really satisfying and interesting. It's also been like I found it really creatively satisfying when I did have more time to do it. Because
Hmm.
for while I was working on Tactical Breach Wizards, that was a part-time job that was really flexible and roughly about 2 or 3 days worth of work every week,
Hmm.
and that was something I deliberately took on for a while, so that partly so I'd have more time to work on videos, as well as being just like really excited to work with Tom Francis on that game.
Yeah.
But uh, when I started, so that was when I was kind of in my main thing of like starting the Patreon and like
Hmm.
making more videos and stuff, trying to make it a regular monthly thing. Um, and the fact that I could release something every month was it's really satisfying in a way that games aren't, frankly, unless you work on tiny
Hmm.
games, like really tiny games. Have as somebody who's like where shipping games is something at best you can do every 2 years in a AAA studio,
Yeah.
usually, and that's me joining in the middle of a project usually. Projects being years long, going from that to something where, and also just only being a small part of a team on that project,
Yeah.
going from that to making my own thing that I finish and release every month was really
Hmm.
fun and kind of quite gratifying and kind of an important step for me in a way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and just fun and satisfying to be able to finish things more often, and then kind of you know I think there's something really healthy and important about releasing things more often, because I think of it in terms of how often you make a move, and you can kind of
Yeah.
think about where that move got you, and then make the next move. With I found, um, with games, you're often making a move every 2 or 3 years or something
Hmm.
like that, and ultimately that leads to not many moves in a career. Whereas
Right.
one of the reasons I went freelance, for example, was to work on shorter contracts with smaller teams and make more moves more often and figure out what I want to do next more often and kind of
Yeah.
iterate on that and stuff. And so the YouTube thing was that, you know, in a really fun way, because I was completely doing it myself. And, looking back, it's interesting to me at least to see how different my videos are and how I've learned a lot about what kind of videos I really want to make and which videos are actually surprisingly hard to make or
Yeah.
aren't that interesting or relative to the amount of work they are, stuff like that. And
Did you
so,
ever have to fight the urge to like be a YouTuber, like to put
oh,
on a persona or like a
oh, completely. Yeah. So that's a good question actually, because I feel like I'm man. Yeah. So I think one way of putting it is that I basically don't like most YouTube stuff,
yeah.
and also like I'm not very good at putting on a persona. Like some people are way more cool with that, and they feel
Uh-huh.
like it, and they feel like they should. And in fact, I've got a friend who's like a really, he's a full time YouTuber. He does like modular synth stuff.
Oh,
He's really
cool.
good at it, and he does he's got a whole like radio voice, like
Mhm.
and kind of a slightly heightened version of himself that he does to make his videos entertaining. And he said
Yeah.
to me, especially early on, because I think I was quite stilted in some ways early on with my videos. He was like, Steve, you've really got to kind of amp it up a bit and like, he says like, be 120% of yourself. And then on camera, it will look normal, like
Uh-huh.
more natural. And I know what he means, but at the same time, I'm just like, but I'm also just not, I really struggle to do that. And I don't want to be
Yeah.
that. And at least, and I don't think I think basically there's a huge thing about just becoming comfortable with who you are and figuring out who you are
Mhm.
and teaching yourself to learn that it's actually okay. Because like
Yeah.
and also finding a style that suits you. Like I could just never do the kind of super slick, like, hey guys thing. Cause I just hate that. I don't have that kind of energy. And ultimately I just need to find a way to focus on stuff that is like what I'm about. and it's taken some
Right.
time for sure. But it's finally got to the point where I can be more myself, I hope, but also
Yeah.
in a way that looks more natural without me trying to be natural. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just yeah. But
Yeah. My
that,
my
it's
wife
definitely something
tells
I
me
struggled with. Yeah.
my wife tells me that I sound like Kevin Costner from Dances with Wolves when I'm talking. Like
That doesn't
that's
sound bad.
just like
It's been a
so
long time
slow.
since I've seen the film, but oh, I see. Right. Okay. Right.
Just like super slow and monotone and like
Honestly, I think the way everybody puts it is like it's not about like I mean, there's always things we can learn. I speak too fast. I'm all over the place, and that's what, especially in podcasts, which is why I like to make videos and edit them down. But I ultimately think it's about, so long as you're communicating clearly and you're saying
yeah.
things that are actually worth saying. Hopefully, there's some
Hmm.
substance to it, and also like rather than confidence and slickness, it's about it sounds cliche at this point, but like authenticity, like seeing someone who's
Yeah.
actually just being themselves, so
Hmm.
long as it's something interesting,
Yeah.
is that's all the internet wants, and that's all we should be in general, rather
Yeah.
than all having the same idea of like, oh, we should all be George Clooney from that film. Like it's like, oh, whatever,
Right.
it's just we should just find a way to be comfortable with ourselves, and like I say, and even more like, even if to me my priority at the start was just making sure that I was making something interesting, that was actually like
Hmm.
solving a problem, or was was kind of unique enough and meaningful enough that there's a reason to watch it. Even and then
Yeah.
I figured if that's the case, I can be a bit stilted and weird and all this kind of thing, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
So
Probably the people that are watching the stuff that we're talking about are probably not too
yeah,
far removed
exactly,
from that kind of
exactly,
personality anyway.
yeah, exactly. And so
Um,
the point is, the priority is whether it's interesting or not, really, rather than how slick the presentation is. And to
yeah.
be honest, that's still something I do. Like, what another thing is that like I could have made twice as many videos if I was okay with just like pointing a webcam at myself, which I did do for a couple of videos. But I'm
Hmm.
also like I'm into photography and a wannabe like film kind of person. So
Yeah.
one of the reasons I started the channel actually, with small on the list, was to learn to use my cameras properly and do all this kind of stuff, get
Hmm.
into cinematography and videography and stuff. So anyway, I basically, I still, one of my things that I could just drop if I was a more sensible person is this idea that I have to film everything with a nice camera and all this
Hmm.
kind of stuff, because that doesn't make any. Well, I think people appreciate it, but I don't think it makes a channel inherently more successful. It's not more important than the content, basically.
Yeah.
But that is something I kind of grab onto, is like, no, that's kind of my thing, and I like doing it, and I
Yeah.
want to make things that look nice and look a
Yeah.
bit different.
I want to get a camera, but right now I'm just like I told you earlier, I'm just using my iPhone as a camera, and
Right.
it's got its own set of issues. But uh,
No, it works. It looks fine. Totally. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, no, the YouTube thing's been super fun and kind of, like I said, there's a fun, interesting mix of it being a mildly entrepreneurial thing as well as a
Yeah.
creative thing. So many creative choices to make in terms of like, and again, I come from this as somebody who generally hates gaming YouTube. I hate gaming YouTube in general, and like game dev
Uh-huh.
YouTube, I think it's quite mixed, in terms of like what's out there. And
Yeah.
so I've got a lot of things where it's like, well, I don't want to do that kind of thing. And what can
Hmm.
I do? I suppose that's been a huge thing. I had a chat with Mark Brown of GMTK a
Oh,
while
cool.
back, and obviously he's massive and he does great videos. But it's interesting to me because we come at such different angles, even though we're ostensibly both talking about game design in various ways.
Hmm.
Because he comes at it, I used to. Now he's a game dev as well. But originally he came at it from a game journalism perspective. His approach, his way into YouTube videos was to pick and this is a good way of being a successful YouTuber, is picking a good topic and then
Hmm.
researching it and then delivering on that topic.
Yeah.
Which means he can kind of pick any topic that he's willing and able to research well. Whereas for me, my thing, at least for now, is that it's all about like what I know or think,
Right.
and
It's
more
like
my experiences and stuff like that.
yeah.
So in a way, I feel limited by that because
Hmm.
I've it's like there's only a limited amount of stuff I know or like have done that is interesting or have an opinion about, um but I've so a lot of the thinking's just been around that, like what can I do that makes sense to me, and where I'm not
Right.
just, because I never want to be just a YouTuber who just, you know talks shit.
Right.
I can't do that. I'm not very good at it, and
Yeah,
I'm not
that's the
saying Mike
main
Brown is doing
reason
that. Mike Brown is like really well researched and thoughtful videos, but
for sure.
I can't. That's not what I would do, so
No,
yeah.
I don't feel comfortable doing that either. And like that's one of the motivations behind me making the decision to interview people that are not me. Cuz like that that means that I can open the door to have other people share their experience
Right.
with me. So with me and with whoever's watching the video.
Yeah.
So that's partially why I decided to do interviews, at least to start.
Hmm.
Is because there's more experience on the other side of the camera, I guess. Or
Oh, and also just the experience of going through this, of trying to do a podcast and interview
yeah,
people. Like, interviewing itself is a skill in itself, and also
yeah,
just like all the little questions of like, okay, what do I call this, and how am I
hmm,
going to approach that, and how do I present, how do I do the thumbnails, and all those are little
yeah,
choices. How clickbaity a title am I going to go for, which is another
yeah,
thing. I'm quite kind of like, I'm personally super anti clickbait to the point where you know, I will sometimes not go for a clickbaity title that I know would work, but I'm just like, I have this thing of like, I don't want to be clickbaity when
hmm,
it's deceptive. I'm just like 100% not into, and like, but
yeah.
there's loads of little choices about how, what the vibe is of your channel and what the right way to play it
Yeah,
is, and it's interesting,
I I want to be authentic, and but I also like you mentioned something about entrepreneurial. It's an entrepreneurial decision to do this, so it's like I don't know. I'm trying to give myself some other avenues, some other money streams, and I don't know that this will ever generate any income, but that's not the initial goal.
Hmm.
The initial goal is actually to have meaningful conversations
Right, right, yeah, yeah,
with interesting people.
yeah. That's it. I
And
think with anything like this, it's a while until you know what it will become, and
yeah,
what potential there is and stuff. Yeah, it's yeah, no, it's cool.
oh yeah. Well, Steve, it was really good talking to you. It was really good to catch up.
And it's great to chat with you as well. Like, catch up on all these things.
Oh yeah. And for anybody who's watching this who hasn't caught Steve's YouTube channel, I highly recommend that. It's a great resource for anybody interested in level design or game design. Steve, is there anything that you want to leave? Any links that you'd like me to leave in the comments um, or in the
Just a
description?
YouTube thing would be great. Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
cheers.
Thank you for joining me, and hopefully we get another opportunity to do this again sometime.
Yeah, totally. Sounds good.
All
Yeah,
right,
cheers for
man.
having me on.
Yep. Thank you.
Cool.